Join me in welcoming Richard Widick. Richard, it's great to see you.
Turn around for me for sure, because I'm not good at this.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so Richard, just to give you a little background, well, first to tell you something just in case it happens. In the middle of you talking, at one point, I'm going to take out my phone and start looking at it. I am not on social media or anything. I will be reading questions that students are writing into Canvas, which I can read on my phone, with any luck. If not, I'll have to go over to the podium and do it. But I think we'll be able to do it okay. And also, so you know that your film is the assignment for this week. Every week we watch a film, documentary. People are already watching it. Some people have already watched it. Some people will be watching it. They have to watch it by the end of the week to make a comment. And there's been some really great comments already posted. So I've already actually put those into Canvas, and I'll be asking you questions from those comments as well. But everyone should know, we're in week 9. This is lecture number 16. The Canvas Q&A is open. You'll see questions that are already put there by me, which I drew from the film comments. So, all that housekeeping aside, Richard, how did you get interested in all this? And by this, I mean justice issues, the climate, the whole thing.
Right. Okay, well, before we get started, Ken, I hope everyone can hear me. Can they?
I don't know.
You gotta turn off on me.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Okay, before we get started, I just have to say, it's been a long time since I've been in a big class like this, and really kind of makes me nervous to see so many expectant faces. And so I tend to get a little bit smiley and happy. I think it's a defense mechanism. And to guard against that, I always bring my notes, okay? So these are long, Kim, but I'm gonna get through these first. And then, that's not really true because this is a tough audience, I'm sure of it. They've been watching my film, and I know it's not going to be an easy task to convert them. I mean, this is a ridiculously long film. It's super hard to watch. You guys are coming in here, you got so much work to do. It's like, okay, we got to watch a movie this week. Not this one. All right, I thought I could do it when I started. Nice little tight film, summing up climate change for you, the integral problems of nature embedded in society and vice versa. And it turns out, as an artist, you need to match your object, your project, to the thing itself. So this is kind of like a form and function thing, a Marshall McLuhanite sort of. This film is just like climate change. It's hard, it's gonna make you angry, it's too loud, you can't understand all of it, but it puts you right in the middle of it. And that's what I hope that you take away from it, that this climate change phenomenon and the global international response to it is a spectacle, which, and you'll read this in the film and see it in the film, functions to convoke all of the people's labor and environmental movements of the world and bring them all together in a sort of like final rally. Hopefully, well, I think you need Leonardo DiCaprio to put together a nice, funny narrative and then come up with actually, if you watch the film, it doesn't do the Hollywood happy ending, does it? Right? Don't Look Up, right? Is that it?
Yep.
I saw that on the syllabus. So anyway, go ahead, skip to the end of this film, tap into it in the middle, watch it in reverse, it's okay. The basic message is inflected in every kernel, in every image, it should be there. The difficulty and the joyous beauty and the exuberance of these people in the film. That's really what I was after. It's my anthem to them. I spent 10 years with them. And I bring it to you here, so if you ever wanted to get involved or think about getting involved, there's going to be people there. They're smart, they're funny, they're passionate, and they found the solution for themselves, which is to dedicate their lives to this social justice issue. Okay, so there it is. That's how I get into it.
There you go. Okay, good. So what are all those notes?
These are printouts from a website that I built to automatically self-publish all the work I did during that 10 years. It's called ICAT, Did you bring that to these guys' attention?
No, I just gave them access to the film, and then we have an alternate place of the film, Vimeo.
Okay,
for
so
the
that's
kids.
IICAT.org, International Institute of Climate Action and Theory. And it follows myself and my colleagues as we went around the world to all these climate conferences and embedded ourselves in the heart of the emergent global climate justice movement, which, as I said, I see as like a funnel for all the other ones, gender, all the identity movements, especially if you've seen any of the film at all, let's just call it the Black Power movement, because we have to, I think, get back to some basics here. The unfinished civil rights movement, which has come to the forefront of media attention since the election of the last president and the present one. The use of a Southern strategy, and anybody want to debate me on that or bring up some points on that, I think it's extremely precise to use that term. I'd love to have some pushback on that. But, preventing black voting rights from expanding or even restricting them across the global South and through the Bible Belt and all the red states is a crucial way for the petroleum interest in this country to maintain their grip on power. Not total, it's a conspiracy. It's an economic structure that feeds on those concentrated environmental values, and when those environmentals are extracted and accumulated and then deployed in the public sphere, they end up producing attitudes among people. So you did a section on climate denialism. Read it again, read the sources on it, and know that everything you're getting from TikTok, if you get your news from Instagram, you're on Facebook, all of it is cut across by the United Institute for Petroleum, what is it? Petroleum Institute of America, whatever it is, it's easy to find. Hundreds of millions of dollars pumped into feeding the system with disinformation, and then all the influencers pick that kind of stuff up and they report it from the front seat of their car or do a dance, whatever it is that they do. But they're getting it off the news, BuzzFeed, Politico. I think those are left wing. I don't really know, but across the spectrum, and that's where a lot of information comes from. So thankfully you've got Ken here, a deep literary historian. Should read his early books, amazing. And I'm totally serious about that. This sentiment that informs his eco-criticism, but all of our contemporary environmentalism is a deep cultural, psychological strain in American, or vein is a better word, in American and in global literary work, and he's got it. So,
well, first, thanks for that. So you're actually the first ever guest to actually read my older work, so that's really cool. And denialism, we just had last week, Naomi Oreskes here, who zoomed in, who went into great detail about that. She's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you want to present any of that, Richard?
It's a prop. Okay. I'm too nervous.
All right, there you go. That's perfect.
If I start to crap out, I'll start reading. I've done this for a lot of years. I taught my own classes for decades, and I can hold forth. But this is a discussion session, so.
So let me just underscore that, the sort of hometown connection here. Your PhD in sociology from UCSB.
That's correct.
And your early work, since you referenced your early work was on, and if people have read The Overstory, you may be familiar with deforestation here in California, especially up north. And by the way, we had our mutual friend Sarah Ray here, who's up from Humboldt County. But your first work was on forestry and redwoods in California.
Yeah, everybody should go out and buy that book. It's on Amazon. I get about 4 cents per copy, so it makes a big difference. I do need a cup of coffee. It's called Trouble in the Forest, California's Redwood Timber Wars, and it's a 150-year social history of the struggle to save the last remaining privately owned redwood forest on California's north coast, redwood coast, on the region up there. So it's centered in Humboldt County. I spent a couple years living up there. And it brought to fruition everything I'd been doing. You wouldn't want to go that far back and say that's my first work, though, because I did my undergraduate studies at this university in environmental studies. And I learned that, the glorious exuberance of the natural world that I identified with as a child was kind of under threat. And it was the greatest hits. You guys all have it already. Love Canal, Bhopal, methyl isocyanate explosion in Bhopal, India. 500,000 casualties. Look it up. A couple years into my environmental studies degree, Chernobyl explodes, Europe is under a cloud of radioactivity, and at the same time, the US is organizing for 20-year occupation in the Fertile Crescent. I know we have a issue with Palestine and Israel right now, which is very hot. And let me just say that that region has been a source of struggle for a long time. And as a sociologist, ultimately, and a scholar of social movements, always looking at what social processes are driving these movements together. Why is the movement to free Palestine also about gender rights and voting rights and environmental rights and climate change? And if you can begin to draw those equivalencies and find out what's underneath there, sociology and literary criticism, eco-criticism, it's always about, it's like a hermeneutics of suspicion. The basic stance is that, look at what's happening, I've made an observation. But underneath, there's going to be some secret causes. In psychology, there's unconscious motives. In society, there's collective, unconscious processes taking place, like all that stuff we said about climate denialism and corporate systems that fund disinformation. And that's not some weird conspiracy. That's not because I did my own research on the internet. That's not the disinformation they're talking about. You're talking about the highly documented process of corporations protecting their interests. It's called free market capitalism. It's what it is. So you got to get down under there and look at that structure, and that's what I discovered. So I went forward and did an economics degree because that's what I found out in environmental studies, that predatory globalization was internalizing the entire ecology of the world as free input values. And first thing, economics, raise your hand, economics major. You've taken macroeconomics, theory of the money supply and all that, but you have to take microeconomics, theory of the firm, first rule of microeconomics, avoided cost is profit. Write it down in your notebook, take it to every job meeting you go to, and start dreaming about it, because it's the rule in a system of governance like we have right here. Avoided cost is profit. If you can dump it in the stream, you don't got to pay for it. So there it is. Environment, economy, and it turns out that there's a lot of crazy people just willing to do anything for money. And you think, that's the final link. Who are these people, these insane planet-killing capitalists? And you think you've got your finger finally on it, and it turns out, they're too, they've been thrown into the system. The world isn't filled with evil people, right? Systems have to produce them for specific things. So you should always be talking about specific individuals at a specific time in history. And that's the historical method when you talk about individuals in a time and place and how they got involved in what they're doing. And all those evil planet-killing capitalists, they also have homes filled with families that they love. And that is a really interesting social psychological question. That's why I ended up in sociology with a PhD emphasis in social psychology, because it comes down to the human question. I'm sure you've been talking about that for weeks. It's not on us, but we are inside the system. So it's partly us that has to answer to this spiraling climate crisis.
Well, first, thanks for pulling that together with the economic end of it. So we've, one of the documentaries I've already watched is Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century, and we've had zoomed in Julius Schor and then Claire Brown, who's from Berkeley, who wrote a wonderful book called Buddhist Economics, imagining if we reimagine the economy in a different, non-competitive way, how that would work. But let me give you a job, Richard, and that is, we've talked about climate justice in the class, and we've had, two of our mutual friends come visit us. One actually actually, sitting up here is David Pello, focusing mainly on environmental justice, and then Nicole Seymour on how the LGBTQ plus community is impacted by and responding to the climate crisis. But you've been in this space for a long time, over a decade, climate justice, before a lot of folks even heard the word. What is climate justice, and why is it so important? Because it really is the central part of your documentary.
Okay, this isn't like me, but I'll sum it up in one word. Probably elaborate a little bit.
Let's hope.
It's fairness. And you know it when you see it. You can look right at it. You can look it right in the face. That's why you got to get out there. You know when people are lying to you. You know when they're cheating you. And you know when something isn't fair. And sometimes it's just a feeling. Sometimes you need to do a little research and figure out why, right? The course materials are full of the data points on this. What is that? Union of Concerned Scientists, poverty analysis. The classic example is 1% of the population of the world uses 50% of the resources, or whatever the figure is, I don't have them memorized, produces the vast amount of pollution in the atmosphere, the CO2 and all the greenhouse gases.
I'll stop you just to quote it for folks, since it will be on the final exam, if we do have a final exam. The top wealthiest 1% of the population has put in two-thirds of greenhouse gas emissions right now. So it's just that tiny 1% that's causing the problem. Most people on the planet are not contributing in any meaningful way. And as I mentioned before, the poorest 3 billion people have only put in 5% of emissions, compared to two-thirds, 63%, or 66% by the top 1%.
Right,
Sorry.
is that Union of Concerned Scientists or
Union
Oxfam?
of Concerned, Oxfam is the one who did the most recent one. And in fact, if you're in English 23, which is the course before this, we start off by reading that Oxfam report, which has a wonderful introduction by Greta Thunberg, by the way.
I have it right in here. I don't have to read it. So that's what it is. That's where it is. And you'll see it in the film. In 2014 in Lima, I was talking to a man who was part of the committee on the left. I think it was the Climate Action Coalition or whatever it was, some group. And I asked him that question, kind of new, but you want to get it on tape. And he said, it's fairness. I said, is that, and you'll see this part of the film, is that word in the Paris Agreement on climate change, 2015? Yes, it's all over the document. We've been struggling to get that in there. So when you read the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change, world's first global, international, really solid treaty on climate action, you'll see that word reduced to a fragment of a sentence in the preamble. Because no way are you going to get that into Article 6 on market mechanisms, okay? They want to use the international climate talks. UNFCCC has become a carnival of special interests who capture power there and use it to commodify the remaining carbon budget and to essentially put a price on the air and the water. That's what the market is for. And that, you'll see that throughout the film, and you should just focus right in on that. This film is about the neoliberalization, or rather the conservative economic transformation of the climate talks from a regulatory body that would impose standards and best available technologies. I hope you guys know kind of what that is. We live in a regulatory state, and there's only a few tools you can use. And one of those is a monopoly of legitimate violence, police power. And you can tell all the companies that they're going to have this amount of emissions, or you can give them an incentive to make money doing it a better way. And that's what market mechanisms are inside of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, a sort of expansion and a colonization of that international sphere of emergent global climate governance by these neoliberal economic thinkers. And they won the game. That's the sort of downbeat, guys, sorry, on the Paris Agreement, is that it has come to function in the service of oil capital and its accumulations and the political and class structures that fuel it. So you got to get into it, and you can just see it, right? I mean, there's a scene in the film where they can't believe it. They just, we got Article 6. Can you believe it? It's just totally amazing. It took us a year to figure out what to do. Now that we get to do, now that we get to put a price on the atmosphere and buy it and sell it on exchanges, like the California regional, no, anyway, I can't remember the names of all the exchanges, but there's one in China, there's the one in Europe, there's the one in the northeast of the United States, and there's California's, and they trade carbon credits as offsets, so that people and corporations, can, instead of reducing emissions at source, they can buy their way out of it. Yeah, like give some money to some people living in the forest in South America and say, yeah, save your forest for 100 years, and we'll give you some money for that, and then they can claim that their emissions are at a certain level. Just check it out, you'll see. It's a total scam. It's a false solution, and it's a product of investment of hundreds of millions of dollars over decades to forcefully colonize the emergent political sphere of emergent global climate governance with oil interests. And that's what the film is actually about at that structural level.
Yeah. We actually saw a pre-recorded interview with Madonna Shiva, and she just summed it all up and said, it's a land grab. It's all that it is, and obviously tied it into colonial issues.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you mentioned COP21. So you were at COP21, and I think you're a number of people we have, like Bill McKibben was there. We also talked to Theo Kane, who was there also, because actually I wanted Theo to give the folks in the audience right now some tips on how to lead an effective protest, since he led one here at UCSB. There's one going on now. So he did that in a really sort of nuts and bolts way. But you've been going to the COPs for quite a few years now. And originally there was that enormous optimism. In fact, we had Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote a book, Ministry for the Future, where COP21 looms large over it in his way of imagining the future. It's a huge turning point. He wrote that in 18, came out in 19. We interviewed him this year. Yeah, not quite as optimistic anymore. And as folks know, COP21 2015 came to the conclusion we needed to cut global greenhouse emissions in half by 2030 if we were going to keep it within sensible limits. And 2024, if you just did the math, we're halfway there. Have we cut it in half? No. Have we stabilized it? No. Have we reduced it in any way? No. It's still increasing. So what's your take on this, Richard? I mean, you've been in this space for so long.
Okay, that is true. Let me stop you and tell you that when I got there, everything had already completely fallen apart. I started in 2011. They started it at Rio 1992. The entire history of it is in the film in various ways, but you can also just go to the UNFCCC website. It's very nicely done. Archives, you can see all my press conferences there. That was my method, was to produce media inside as a representative of the University of California in the research silo. And so I had the benefit of being taken to school by some really radical climate justice activists. Michael Dorsey, who is the first sort of global black intellectual to appear right in the beginning, and just sums it up in a vignette, right? The history of 21st century climate negotiations is the history of corrupt corporations, insidious criminals capturing the process, period. Then just watch, right? And then the next one comes up. It's Camila Morena from Brazil, and she's a socialist activist, but she's also a major intellectual figure down there. And I was lucky enough to meet her, and she starts talking about climate structural adjustment. What we're watching now is the structural transformation of economic legal systems across the global south at the I want to say at the request, but that's not strong enough. That's the mandate from the global north, where power circulates, right, between the city of London and Wall Street and the banks and the world banks, and that's where the heads of all these places are. And And yeah, you can get a development loan to, let's say, develop solar resources in Peru, but it's going to be at our terms. And these are the companies, these are the technologies, these are the conditions of capital accumulation. Any investments have to bear a profit. So you've got to pay the discount rate, the interest rate. So climate action in this neoliberal model has to bear that burden of the capitalist masters. And that was the discourse that I came into from people like Michael Dorsey, Camila Moreno, Patrick Bond of South Africa, I think probably is the leading intellectual. Talk about how to run a social movement. You started to mention that. Just watch those guys dig into their career histories and find out what you do. You just work tirelessly as an organizer, until the end of your life, I guess, because that's what we're doing. So, and sometimes it even feels like there's something to show for it. And in fact, there is. Of course, we produce our own lives. And you have to actually think economically at the margins, right? Do not think of what I'm saying as detracting from the international climate talks. Nothing more important in the world, nothing more beautiful, no more committed, beautiful people from every part of the world where you find. It is an amazing thing. And I have to make the Hegelian point, you criticize that because it's falling short, because they made a promise and they're breaking it. But it's because you love them, it's because you want them. You want them to succeed. So that's why I was able to put 10 years into it and still maintain my, humanity or my personality, whatever it is. Some people don't manage to do that. It's tough because you get the defeat and the sort of objective statistical realities of climate change are so grotesque that it can be brutal. But you at the margins, if you think economically, right? If you prevent a little bit of it, if you make it a little bit worse, then that means some young girls will be drinking out of a fountain on the island nations for an extra year. And that's what poetry is. That's where beauty comes from. The incremental challenges of daily life just to survive. And so you just, the small victories, the right, like the fact that they committed to 1.5 degrees, okay? This is really important. In Paris, they committed to no more than 1.5 degrees. Well, we've blown past that. I'm sure you've covered that. It's 2 degrees now. And by the way, it varies all over the country. So Santa Barbara is like at 3 degrees already.
Celsius.
Yes. Yeah. Yesterday in the news, 6 inches of global sea level rise in the Miami area, floating septic tanks and polluting rivers and changing species gradients along the ecotones, the edges of the various ecological niches where change is going to be driven more rapidly because of this. So, you take solace in that because, right? I mean, everything comes into existence and passes away. So with this kind of stochastic economic thinking, you can learn to say, well, I contributed. Yeah, I didn't solve the problem of climate change, but I had a really good time. I met some awesome people. We partied very hard throughout. And we contributed to being on the right side of history. And yeah.
So first, I'm going to do a little business and take the next iClicker poll so people know. And Richard, let me just do this. So if I can go over here. Okay, there we are. So yeah, Richard, I remember when you came back from COP21 and you were there with a group of people, Theo, John Foran, and others, and were not cheerful the way the media spin was on it. From a justice point of view, this was not the success that we thought it that we were being told that it was altogether. So my last question for you, before I'll stop monopolizing, and then I'm going to start fiddling with my phone, seeing what people are asking. How do you feel about this, 10 years later and counting? You've kind of been talking about it, but just, how do you, we've been asking this to other people too, how do you keep going and stay optimistic? Or maybe that's not the word I want. Just keep going and not be sort of, I don't know, debilitated by all this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. Thanks. I think I actually just answered it.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to reiterate that. But I definitely think that an old critical theoretical formula would come in handy for anybody who's really interested, and that is that a negative of a negative is a positive. Okay? So if something's going wrong out there and you go criticize it, you're doing something good. And you're trying to call a new world into being, right? And that works on an individual level, right? You look at your friend, you tell them how good they look, they smile. Well, people never look better when then they smile, so you just made them look better. Now he's laughing, you're laughing too. Pretty soon you're having a good time, right? You go to a social movement, you put your flag up and see who stops by. Go out and put up a camp for Palestine, and suddenly people are saying, why free Palestine? Who even knows? Who knows about that? And pretty soon there's people gathering around there talking about it. That's what it is. You put up that flag and you see who turns out. And that is what a movement is. People are not constituted prior to their social relationships, but rather through them and in them. And if you go into the encampment or one of the protests, or you join the union and strike, you will be transformed. And all you did was show up and start listening, right? You did it already with school. You came, you didn't have to come here. But you participate, and you walk out with a whole different set of parameters with which to see the world. And believe me, the other side knows that. And they're going to be, from now on, your students, some of you may even be graduating, and your life is going to be a system of choices, and it's a system of reward and punishment, like a little rat race. Sorry for the cliches, you kicked me off the stage for that. But and they're gonna say, yeah, I know everything, Palestine, all the guns and weapons, the killing and everything. But if you just take this little treat and go to work in the bomb factories or the gun factories or for the oil industry, and this is really tough. Sorry for you geology majors, because you want to be great, but you're going to end up. There's the agencies and the corporations are going to be fighting for your attention, and some people are going to pay you more than others, and then you're going to be facing these choices as young economic subjects about where and the real thing that you're going to face is people will say, look, we're just talking about business here. Just put these economic blinders on. This is not about your morality. This is not about your humanity. This is the job. You take this job, you take this money, you're going to go home. You're going to have that nice house, that car, full set of appliances, all that. I'm sure you talked about consumerism. It's a project. Read the history of it. Watch a film called Century of the Self. YouTube, Century of the Self, 4 episodes from the BBC around 2001. You know that one?
I do.
Yeah, so it's phenomenal, and the public relations component of the spectacle of climate change negotiations and its capture by economic forces is all prefigured in the application of psychological theories to the system of advertising, which when it's not for products, when it's for politics and everything, it's called public relations. So you guys out there from communications that don't know what your degree is about, because that's a weird thing about communications sometimes, it's like, I don't really know what I'm studying. And that's not a slur, I'm just saying it's complicated. But you're learning all the tools that you have to intervene in these giant global spectacles by mastering the tools of the trade. And those are the tools that are the most important tools. So there's so much to say in answer to that question. Get out there, find a way, and know that a lot of people are going to be offering you a trajectory or a place that doesn't look that fun, doesn't look that great. Not going to be that cool. Might even be ashamed of it later. But the global climate justice movement That's going to be something you'll be telling your kids about, right? When they're inside the heat shelter, right? Well, you gave it a shot. You were there. It was fun. Here's a picture of me partying in South Africa. We did our best. So I'm a spokesman for the movement. And that's kind of what this film is. Like I said, it's an anthem to them and all of their historical antecedents, and especially the civil rights movement, but also labor and environmental and anti-war movements, free speech movements.
Yeah, we're going to get to the question in a minute, but I think that's right. I remember growing up and I wasn't old and I was too young to be involved with the civil rights movement. I always look back and thought, wow, that was one of the most interesting moments of history and I just missed it by a few years. Sorry to say, you're not missing it. It's right now, right here. The climate justice movement, the climate youth movement just started. I mean, it has just started a few years ago. It started before Greta Thunberg. We know people were involved for many years, but this is it. This is that moment now. But anyhow, I've talked too much. I'm going to start reading questions now. See, I'm really looking at the questions. So first question starts off. I love the film, exclamation mark. Can you speak
Please stand up.
Can you speak a little bit on why you've chosen filmmaking as a medium to represent your work that you've been doing? Have you always been interested in filmmaking, or was there something specific that inspired you about this particular project?
Yeah, well, thanks. That's also a great question, and the answer has already been discussed. I came up through environmental studies, economics, sociology, social psychology, and the application of psychical understanding to the industry of public relations. What matters to you all right now, right? You need to know this, right? You're all public relations agents, right? You know that if you go to a job counselor, they're going to say, you got to manage your LinkedIn profile, okay? Each one of you is now a brand manager. What's the brand? It's you. And to exist, you must appear. And if you're not out there and there's no buzz, then who are you? And how many likes did I get? And I don't want to go down too far down that road because there's a social media reaction against that. I actually think it's quite vibrant and I love it. But you have to use things, I think, with conscious application of their rules and know what's going on. So that's my answer to that question. Yeah.
That's a great answer. So a couple other ones, but let me get to a really short one. Right on point. What do you mean when you reference, quote, climate structural adjustment?
Okay, well, that's crucial. We've talked about it for a second. The go-to text on that is Mike Davis, Planet of Slums. It's about 2004. You can read, you just Google the PDF, Mike Davis, Planet of Slums. You'll get the New Left Review article on that one. And essentially, there's been this transformation of the world into well, it's a really interesting process. It's called de-industrial urbanization, okay? Yeah, cities are growing, but not like they did here as centers of industrial activity, but rather as centers for the refugee status of all the people who are being driven off their land by the new enclosure movements and by the massification and industrialization of agriculture. And so anyway, you end up, the emergent global system of economics, globalization ends up producing these massive situations of poverty. For example, NAFTA. Hey, it looks great, NAFTA, free trade with Mexico, but it cost about 10 million farmers their jobs. Where are they now? Visit the slums of Mexico City, right? It's everywhere across the planet of slums. You can't even understand anything until you know that this process is ongoing. And then these governments that have to manage this, I guess a better way to put that is how to engineer and socially organize mass society in places like this and here as well. They need money, they need help. So then you help them. But then it's like asking money from your dad. Like, yeah, can I have $1,000? Yes, but don't go down to the, marijuana store with it. You got to show me the receipts from university on that, right? There are conditions on the loans, and you use the power of debt over governments in the global South, often corrupt, and you say, yeah, we're going to give you this money, but you can't invest it in healthcare and you can't invest it in schools, and you don't need sewers, right? You need to get those people to work. You put it in business, you put it in money, you pay the rate on this. And what you end up with is sort of a global system organized under the General Agreement for Trade and Tariffs, but basically it's IMF, World Bank, and the WTO. I'm sorry for that. That's the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. And they use debt, or they did use debt as a weapon, to transform the economic systems of emergent, we used to say third world, but now we say developing nations, underdeveloped nations, and you use that debt to control them and to control their politics. Case of Chile, just look it up. We ran the coup in Chile in 1972, supported the dictatorship under Pinochet's dictatorship, and gave them the money, and they had to neoliberalize the whole economy. All right, so that's the way it works. Now take that whole apparatus and apply it to climate change. If you're going to participate in climate governance and you're going to, like if you're going to get the best technology and we're going to transfer, let's say, renewable energy IP to you, then we're going to do it on our terms because we own it, and we're going to give you last week's technology. Right? So down in Southeast Asia, and this is an analysis is a little bit too old, but down Southeast Asia, right? China has a lot of influence down there, and they say, well, we're closing down our power plants. We're closing down our coal plants. And that means they shut them down and disassemble them and move them to Malaysia or to Laos and Cambodia, these different places, and you buy these disassembled plants and redo it down there. So you're upgrading to solar and selling the coal to the other people, right? And that's a little bit how that goes. And that's climate action. That right there is better because those coal plants are, I guess, better than deforestation. Anyway, it's complicated, and I cut a lot of edges off of that argument just to get it out. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. So I have a very long question, but very thoughtful. So maybe cut a little bit out in the middle, but let me just jump in. You mentioned Marshall McLuhan at the beginning of the lecture, whose book, The Medium is the Message, I recently read. Since reading it, I've been seeing connections to his ideas in almost every class I've taken, but especially this one. His ideas about technological advancement are connected to surveillance capitalism, which is connected to human commodification, which is connected to corporate conglomeration, which is connected to free market capitalism, which is directly connected to climate change. By the way, all right in that genealogy. Sorry for the long-winded question, but going back to McLuhan's ideas on the connectivity through the media, it seems to me you know a lot about social media algorithms and the spread of misinformation. Do you think that the connectivity it has provided us could help us with issues of climate denial? Is there a way to get around the click-based algorithms and echo chamber of social media to get to the core of this connectivity and have genuinely productive discussions about climate change and denial?
Yeah, totally, definitely there is. You just have to do the work, and those conversations are taking place everywhere. And I'm not sure if this is really a question about AI or because people are now going to use AI to defend against AI, and you can just draw that out into the future, and then of course just look for it because Hollywood is already making that movie, right? Battle of the various AIs. Okay, so you got to use AI as a tool to identify what is a bunch of AI gibberish, which is about half of what you're reading already in the news, and because they have the automated bots that are producing news articles and funneling them across everything, right? So the thing is, there are human beings out there, and you talk to those people, and you're a human being too. You're going to be able to dial that in really easily, right? Start local, start global, doesn't matter, but you're going to go all climate change is local, right? But it's all global as well, and you put some pollution in the air here, and it affects Antarctica. So that's the new world, just like Bob Marley said, one world, right? And that's kind of a real thing that's happening. So, you may feel isolated and alone, but but actually you're among like an infinite web of people that you can begin to build those actual real social relationships with. So don't despair at all. It's awesome. You're going to find the people in the same condition as you, and you're going to be able to get to them through social media, and then you can put your phones down if you want, just hang out. And I mean, the history of Marshall McLuhan, that's great, but if whoever wrote the question, your real focus should be on the critical theoretical writings of the Frankfurt School and ultimately sort of a rogue theorist in that is Guy Debord, who wrote The Society of the Spectacle, right? All things now. What is capitalism? It's a social relationship between people mediated by property. Wait, that's Marx, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, it's mediated by environment. That's Marx on steroids when you finally realize it's not just exploitation of labor, but exploitation of environment. But ultimately, you have to get to McLuhan and the sort of TV generation, and then the most disaffected of all, the most pessimistic, the hardest to read, the most violent, poetic reaction from the Situationist International, led by Guy Debord, and his book, Society of the Spectacle. So YouTube, film Society of the Spectacle, watch it, read the book, and know that capitalism now is a social relationship between people that's mediated by images. And if you don't think that's true, just don't bring your phone to class. You can't even take the poll. You can't get on the thing. It now is a system of representation. What is capitalism? That's like, I'm sorry to do this to you, but raise your hand. Well, it's kind of tough because it's like asking a fish about the water. Like, what's the water? What are you, crazy? And no, capitalism is what you do. It's all around you. It's an absent present effect of a structure, and that structure is transformed by media, and it becomes increasingly mediated. And now you have to be a culture producer because that's what you are. And this is kind of early 1967, but that's the cool thing about history is that it shocks you out of your dogmatic slumber in the present, so that you just kind of wake up and like, holy cow, I'm not just this isolated, unemployed person. I'm part of a growing unemployment rate, and it turns out the system is making an entire class of people completely useless and redundant. And look, there's a bunch of them right over there. So, meet me after class if you want to set up an encampment, and we can, campaign for the. You know what I mean? I'm just saying that the questioner is right on target. I hope the film is like that. And the form and function thing I said about McLuhan was more like this. The film had to be. It had to share characteristics with the problem. Too big, too hard, too fast, too loud. Make you sad, make you angry, raise questions. But it doesn't just pan out. It's not going to just be okay. This is grown-up time now. It's not that easy. And afterwards, after I was done doing it, I'd go home and watch a Hollywood movie. Nice narrative frame, continuity style, sutured at the end. You feel good. Easy to fall asleep. So, it's a narcotic.
Yeah.
This is not a narcotic. It's more like something else. It's not an opiate. Put it that way.
Well, first, thanks for that genealogy, going back to 80 years ago to Theodor Adorno and others in the Frankfurt School. And I would add yet another work on top of it more recently, Slow Down, the Degrowth Manifesto, which is out there now, which is bringing a reevaluation of capitalism in that sense, which is so pervasive that, Fred Jameson once said quite aptly, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Yeah, and we kind of had that imaginative problem right now. Oh, and also, as an aside regarding AI tools, just so that you should know, you probably know this already, but professors are now using AI to analyze and identify AI. So if you turn something in, that's getting run through an AI, which sees if the turns made in creating it were actually generated by a person or AI. It's kind of easy to actually see it. I can tell the comments that are AI comments, but...
Just so you know, the new version of ChatGPT 4.0 Omni, right, is studying those professors very closely and making it so you can get around it. So the professors are like in a constant retraining.
So
it's the new battleground. It's the new battleground for authenticity, and it's a super interesting phenomenon.
It is.
I don't know how much energy I have for it, but you guys got to get into that.
Yeah, I don't have energy for it, but have to get into it, unfortunately. So the next is actually a comment which gets to an important part of the film. The film effectively highlights that, like the civil rights movement, the fight for climate justice requires collective action and solidarity. It emphasizes the disproportionate impact of environmental justice issues on marginalized communities and calls for effort to address these challenges. The message is clear. Achieving climate justice is not about environmental protection, not only about environmental protection, but also about ensuring social equality and human rights. Overall, I thought this film is a powerful reminder of our responsibilities to advocate for a sustainable and just future for all. A lot of thoughts there, Richard. I mean, first, the connection to the civil rights movement, that the need for collective action, solidarity, not just personal action, that sort of thing. So, comments on that?
Yeah, I just think that civil rights component is so transparent right now because let's just go right to the heart of the matter. The incoming presidential election is going to be fought between a real old-time, old-style capitalist and a new sort of, kind of almost chaotic white nationalist insurgent person who on the first day wants to run a deportation campaign that's never been seen in history. 10 million people on the first day start the program. You're gonna have to build camps for them because you can't get them out fast enough. So imagine massive camps along the border for your friends and neighbors here in California who don't have the right papers or look a certain way. And the second thing is drill, baby, drill, drill, drill. And this coming from somebody who was president once before, but also did that then. And now the United States is pumping more oil every day than any country ever has in the history of oil pumping. It's, I think, 15 million barrels a day. That's 55 gallons a barrel. Do the math. It's unbelievable amount. Why you think, well, I've been through economic theory. What's the supply and demand, right? Well, shouldn't the market be flooded? Prices should be going down on that, if that's true. Yeah, well, things get a little bit more complicated when you throw in the political dimension, right? So they have control over production, and they make money doing it. So get me back to the question.
It was just, hold on, I will swing back to it.
Yeah.
The connection to the civil rights movement and then collective action and solidarity.
There it is. I mean, it's immediate repression. I have it under. The real battle in this election is over who gets to vote. And across the global, across the American South and Bible Belt especially, but everywhere, especially in the red states, you have a concerted campaign to undermine the integrity of elections and prevent especially concentrated Black American constituencies, but also impoverished communities as well, and people of color. But specifically, it's just so, it's been such a great boon for them over the decades to fight voting rights in the South in the context of the civil rights movement. Well, that era is coming back. It's like raging. Just look it up. There's just laws being passed everywhere. Just tiny little barriers, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. That, you're no longer allowed to bring water to a line of somebody who lined up to vote in Georgia because you could be trying to influence them. But you've already restricted them to one voting booth. So there's a 2-hour line and you can't approach. I mean, it's really crazy, and I'm sure you've seen some of it, but if you start looking close at that, you'll see, right? And I just think that that's I'm sure you've used this term, but in that particular political moment, this particular political moment, authoritarianism on the rise and all that, you see the intersection of all these lines, right? So this is the intersection in voting rights and the election and climate change and Palestine, and all these, you see a few threads that are all coming together right now. And one side is on one side, and the other side is on the other side. And it's not that easy. It's not that hard to tell the difference. And I really implore you to just sort of dig in to that civil rights component of this coming election, not the 1970s, not the 1960s, because all they need is a couple percentage points if they can carve off the top, and then they win. So I'm sorry to be, I'm a political thinker, I'm a political theorist. It's kind of what I do. I can't get away from it. And now that in the sphere of the arts, you really have to go for the juggler. One thing you learn about film is that every piece of real estate is infinitely important. Those interviews that are so long to sit through, a series of 3-minute interviews, those are hour-long interviews that I did with those people often. And you just have to watch them over and over again and find that kernel that fits into some kind of structure that you're working. So,
Yeah. I just can't help but throw in a little something with that. In California, if you're registering to vote, you can use your student ID to register if you're a college student. If you're in Texas, you can't use a student ID. It's not acknowledged. But if you're a gun owner and have a firearms ID card, that will be acknowledged, and you can register to vote. It's a tiny little law, but, well.
Literally hundreds of new laws since the election of the current president have been put forward, and they're just chipping away at voting rights. And that's what do you call that? That's like trench warfare. I mean, to fix that, you got to go out into each county and dig into their rules and start organizing, like they did back in the 60s.
And I'm going to add on that. It's something to think about because grassroots activists are out there now changing laws by the 100 on the other side too. So if you think that like climate activists are the only people who care about this, the people in Richard's film and all, but no. Battles are being made for voting rights everywhere. Battles are being made for control of school boards. Battles, and we're talking K through 12. Battles are being, over what books will be allowed in schools, what can be told. And for example, in Wyoming, they put forth a law that the climate crisis cannot be taught in school, full stop, unless it's to say that it is not true. That law didn't pass, by the way, but activists are working on that sort of thing.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Hey, it's their moment. They're going for it. But try to remember 1992 and the contract with America. There's a good chance that the reaction right now will overstep the boundaries, and there could be if enough people figure it out, there could be a 25-year progressive period, and you don't even know in the beginning that you're part of it, but and hopefully there will be, because otherwise we're all sunk. On the climate crisis thing, at least.
Yeah, so next question, because I don't want to miss these. I'm going to miss some, I can't help it. Knowing your intentions with the film, I think the idea of the film's structure reflecting climate change itself, loud, anger, confusing, etc., is really interesting. Still, as I was watching it, I found it kind of overwhelming at times. Do you think there is an effective way to get the core message out to people who might be unwilling to sit through all 2.5 hours of that? I think that's a great question, because I have the advantage, because in lectures and all, I can force people to come here. In fact, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to take an iClicker poll again to make sure you were here. But you have sort of a volunteer audience.
Yeah, I have to say that when I was doing the final work on this film, probably 2017 to 2021, I was floating it to Hollywood types, and they just said, look, you have to pay for it yourself. You don't make money on climate change movies. You don't. It doesn't happen, right? Leonardo DiCaprio can do one, but that's not a blockbuster. Don't look up that is, because that's the Hollywood formula. But the other one, those documentaries, people pay for those as image campaigns, and then, right? So I didn't get any takers on that, and I was left sort of isolated, and I decided to take another track, which was to totally be independent and do it myself without any funding and just put it out there on my own website, following my own rules. And I'm an old critical theorist, but I'm also trained in film theory, and I know about the socialist constructivist movements of the early 20s, the films of Eisenstein and Vertov and that whole crew. And at that time, look it up, look for the man in the camera, man with a camera, okay? Man with a camera. You can't get through film school without seeing it, right? Socialist constructivist film. The Soviet, whatever, Politburo or whoever, Ministry of Culture or whatever, they funded these films, and people would go watch them, and the intent was that the content of the film would transform the subject into the political being that they wanted that person to be. And so I was, I'm just kind of playful. This is postmodernism. It's pastiche, right? It's playful. It's ironic. It's dead serious. But that's interestingly where a lot of the most serious things can be discussed is in irony and in comedy. And I thought, well, let's give this a bit of a socialist constructivist mashup characteristic in which the person who watches it actually is going to come out a little bit different if they can sit through it and watch it. The message, that is the message. The message is that you're overwhelmed. Almost everybody I know, I'm glad to hear some people saying nice things. That's because you've all been, you're all polite people probably, and you want to, if you can think of something nice to say, you're going to say it. You don't want to confront me directly, right, with my filmmaking techniques and criticism like that, which I appreciate that a lot, actually. It's easier to deal with. But the film is meant to make you angry. It's meant to make you say, why don't you just turn down the music? How about when the chief from South America is whistling over the guy who's giving you just a whole nother line of bullshit, on the markets, and you just can't even get rid of this guy. He's just so omnipresent, showing up with the same old rhetoric. And a couple hallways over, the indigenous leader who's come to represent his community's struggles with the land grab we were talking about, Red Plus and all that, he's invoking the sounds of the forest. And so I just wanted to drown him out. I tried to, and ultimately I had to say that I had to not turn it up so that he didn't get totally drowned out. If you struggle, you can hear, right? And you can see. If you really go there and you really struggle, you'll be able to find the indigenous voices. They're there. They're not in the main stage. They're over there in the special indigenous platform area where people can do whatever they want. But over here, we're talking about finance, so the bankers, come on, let's go this way. And how do you say that? I mean, you could say that in the film and state one more time that indigenous voices are not represented here. The capitalists are represented, the oil companies have much more power. But I wanted to show it, and I think that's a thing with film. You want to show what's happening. And, plus I wanted to be playful and throw in some socialist constructivist reasoning, which, it's a little bit dated, okay? So, for me, that was really fun. And I'm sorry, I know that if you take this film as like, what am I supposed to write a 3-minute summary for Ken's class? I'm really mad about that. Now, I hope it's easier now that you've got some.
First off, it's a terrific film. And second, just to your point about how do you get something out to an audience, I think one of the most successful films dealing with the related issue would be something like Cowspiracy with Kip Anderson. Nobody wanted to do that film. He could not get funding for it. He had to ultimately crowdsource it online. It wasn't Kickstarter, but it was another one, I forget. And it still got made, and no one wanted any parts of it. So, and you may be surprised because you've probably seen it in high school. If you've been in the English 22 or 23, you've seen it. Ultimately, it was Leonardo DiCaprio who used his clout, signed on as an executive producer, didn't give any money, but just signed on so that it got Kip Anderson talking to Netflix and got the film out there. But without that, so much is just not seeing the light of day, which is just remarkable, really, because people want to do things like Oppenheimer. Not that it was a bad film, but why? Sorry.
Yeah.
So next question. We're going to have to wrap up in a minute, Richard. Sorry, there's a lot more here. It's an injustice that those least responsible for climate change, often without homes, cars, or sufficient resources, are the most vulnerable. This includes communities affected by race, gender, and poverty. I also found Bill McKibben's contribution to the film to be striking, as he stressed that we can't wait to see if the planet gets 1.5 degrees hotter. We need immediate, so this person really ends with a statement, and you can comment on it. We need immediate action against major fossil fuel companies like ExxonMobil and Koch Industries.
Okay, well, I'm going to take the liberty of making a statement about that. Thank you very much for provoking it. But which is also my final point on the last discussion we were just having, that last little segment about what to do. And this is coming straight from the Butthole Surfers, if I'm not incorrect. Jello Biafra, any bands out there? But he back in the 90s, during the original indie media movement, he said, you got to be the media. Be the media. That's the mandate now, right? Like, if you want to get a film out there, then you got to go make it, because with a few $1,000s, you can get an 8K camera, and you got it in your hand, and what's stopping you? Leonardo DiCaprio won't pick up the phone? I mean, you have to do it anyway. You have to, if you're an artist, you don't need to be asking people what needs to be done. You have to do it. And then, and if you don't need to do it and you can't get it done, that's great, but just go do it anyway. And you could easily end up like me, totally broke, with a piece of art that I love, and hoping that somebody would pick it up. Of course, not in its final form. No one's going to pick up that film. In fact, I have it up on Film Freeway, right? Right, and that's for the whole world to see, all film festivals to reject, just one by one, reject. And I'm just sitting back thinking, yeah, I know it's not what you wanted to see, it's not what you wanted to hear. It's not for you, actually. It's for me and the people that I saw and the people that I met. And when I sent it around to the climate justice movement, I said, here it is, it's for free, it's for us. We need to learn each other. We need to know each other better. And that's why everyone should get involved in the climate talks, because when you get there, you're going to find there's a whole line of people, and just standing in line, you're going to meet PhDs in forestry from Madagascar. Unbelievable convocation of all the movements, and a machine. The climate talks are like a machine for convoking the people's labor and environmental movements and bringing them all together so that they can know each other. It's just like a carnival for that. And so if you want to make films, then you got to find that passion and just do it. Just have to be the media yourself. And your friends will help you because it's fun and cool.
I was going to give you an opportunity to make a closing statement, but I think that's just so awesome. So I'm going to take roll in a second, but first, class, can we stop and thank Richard for coming? Okay, and I hope to see everyone here on Monday if we have class, but if not, thanks for coming. Thanks for the course.
Can I hand this back to you, Ken?
You can, Richard.